7. I think it's significant that the casualty rate among Commando squads trained by Mandalorians is lower than those trained by other races. Somehow, Mandalorians imbue their charges with a sense of purpose, self-confidence, an almost obsessive sense of clan, of family. That gives them a genuine survival advantage. Let us be thankful they're on our side this time. General Master Oregon Zay, Director of Special Forces, Officer Commanding SOBDE, addressing the Jedi Council. SO Brigade HQ Croissant Briefing Room 8 1500 hours 370 days after Geonosis. I thought we'd have a chat, said Scarata. He turned the chair around and swung his legs astride it, folding his arms on the chair back and resting his chin on them. Just us, Mando boys. No Arutisais present. Delta Squad had settled in seats on one side of the briefing room, and Omega on the other, with a table between them. Scarata could have sliced through the atmosphere between Atin and Sev with her vibroblade. How could they think he had noticed? He knew how to read every nuance of cloned men like a book. Even if they weren't the ones he knew intimately. In fact, he could read most species now. So they either thought he was stupid, or they were so at ease in his company that they felt no need to disguise their feelings. And the Delta boys, like Omega, were painfully loyal to their sergeants. They sat around in dark red fatigues, looking disturbingly young, without their armor and weapons. You don't see Termukan or Jusik as traitors, do you? Diamond said. I was using Arutiers in the general sense of non-Mandalorians. Oh, Darmin was fond of Etain, wasn't he? He'd have to keep an eye on that. What I've got to say is just squad business, not the officers. Scarata dropped his knife from his sleeve and fidgeted with the blade, running his fingertip carefully along the honed edge. I hope you are listening to this, Delta. Yes, Sarge. Boss was watching him intently. And you, Sev. Sev glanced at Atin for the merest fraction of a second, but enough to confirm Scarata's hunch. Yes, Sergeant. Okay, number 1. Any bad blood between me and Val is our business, not yours. If any of you want to fight about it, I'll personally make you regret it. Save it for the bad guys. The silence was almost solid. Aten stared ahead of him, unblinking. Sev compressed his lips as if choking back protest, and flicked a glance at Nina. Darman and Phi simply looked baffled. No, Sev, Scarata said. Nina didn't say a word to me, but I've got eyes in my backside, and a very good memory. You do not have a grudge against Atin, do you understand me? If you want to argue the toss about my little altercations with Val, then you have it out with me. Understood, Sergeant. Good. Prove it. Sorry. You too. Scarata motioned to Aten and Sev with the point of his blade. Get up and shake hands. Neither Aten nor Sev moved for a moment. I said, get up and shake hands now. Scarata wondered if he'd lost them. But then Aten stood just a heartbeat before Sev did. They leaned across the table that separated them and shook hands as ordered. Now, do it again and mean it. Scarata said quietly, you have to be one team now, one big squad. And when I tell you what we're up against, you'll understand why. Boss, I expect you to keep your boys in line. Boss leaned forward and shoved Sev in the back. You heard the sergeant. Aten held his hand out again. Sev took it and shrugged. Good, Scarata said. Because we're off the charts now. What we're about to do has no official authorization from the Senate or the generals. So if we screw up, we're on our own. Ah, said Scorch. So Jusik and Turmerken don't know about this. Oh yes, they do. Then who's we? You, our young generals. Ordo, Val, and me. Scorch raised his eyebrows. You're operational again? It was time for a little theater. Yes, Scarata hurled his knife with an exquisite accuracy born of decades of surviving by it. It embedded itself in the wooden paneling behind Sev, half a meter to his right. Bet you can't do that with a vibroblade, son. He can if I pick him up and throw him, said Phi. They all laughed. Scarata wondered if they'd still be laughing in a few minutes. Order was due back soon. With any luck, he and Val would have beaten some information out of Orjul. The Nikto were probably too tough even for Val to crack in that time. In the end, it might not matter. He had his team ready to deploy on Coruscant now. His team, not the Republic's. And they could do things that CSF either wouldn't or couldn't. Oblim had his hands tied by laws and procedures. And maybe he even had a mole among his own comrades. But this strike team had no laws at all. It didn't even exist on 000. It was 0. Scarata hadn't asked Zay what would happen to them if they got it wrong. They could end up dead, all of them. It was an academic detail. Squash got up, pulled the knife from the wall, and handed it back to Scarata with a grin. Fixer applauded. Remember all that dirty Black Ops stuff that me and Val taught you way back? Scarata said. Scarata slid the blade back up his sleeve again. My dad's knife. All I have of him. I took it off his body. Or did you file it with the boring stuff on contingencies, orders, and emergencies procedures? I think we recall it, Sarge. Scarata remembered it, and didn't want to. It was training that had to be done. It broke his heart, but it was going to be all that stood between those boys and death sooner or later. They had to be able to face the unimaginable, and yes, there were even worse things than charging a line of droids with your comrades. There were the things you might have to face alone, in a locked room, with no hope of rescue. Maybe Val was right. Perhaps trainees needed to be brutalized beyond the point where they were just brave, pushed into a state of existence where they became animals intent only on survival. That was how Val had nearly killed Atin. It was why Scarata had then gone after Val and nearly killed him. "I'm not proud of what I did to you," Scarata said. "You crawled through the Nerf guts first, Sarge. It looked like so much fun that we followed you in," Fi roared with laughter, and leaned back in his seat. "And then you threw up." The sickener, they called it. One more endurance test to make sure they could face conditions that would break and kill lesser men. Crawling through a ditch filled with rotting Nerf guts. But there were more tests to come. A night out in fest-like temperatures. No sleep for 3 days. Maybe more. Scant water, a full 60-kilo pack, and blistering heat. And a lot of pain. Pain. Pitiless verbal abuse. And humiliation. A captured commando could expect brutal interrogation. They had to be able to cope without breaking. And it took some imaginations to test that to the limit. How far is too far, Cal? Val was much more detached about handing out all that punishment than Scarata could ever be. It was very hard to hurt your sons, even if it helped them survive the unsurvivable. "Well," Scarata said, mortified that Fi could take it in such good spirits. "The Nerf guts were the fun part. It all goes downhill after that." Sev seemed quite animated. "Do we get to do assassinations?" "If we do, they never happened. You imagined them." "Whoops. My trigger finger just slipped, Sarge. Honest." "You catch on fast about the fascinating world of politics, in which we now find ourselves, young men." "Is it okay if I say politicians are gutless, Chakir?" Squash asked. "Call them what you like, son. You still haven't got a vote." Scarata felt the thud of boots striding down the passage outside. The vibration carried, their voices didn't. Wars are legal violence. Everything else is just crime. Fortunately, we're Mandalorian, so we're a lot less prissy about that fine distinction. Just point us at the bad guys and say go. That's the awkward bit. "What is?" Squash asked. "You've got to find them first." "Well, we found quite a few so far." Delta laughed like one man. Even Sev and Omega joined in. The coded entry system blipped and the doors slid open. Odo strode through them, probably aware of the kind of entrance he could make. Delta had never worked with a null arc before. Maybe they thought it would be no different from working with Alpha or any of the other Django-trained ARC troopers. Scarata watched with interest. Oda would certainly break some more ice. Sir, Delta said sharply. All at once, Nina and the rest of Omega just touched their brows casually. Sorry I'm late, Sergeant. Odo took off his helmet, tucked it under one arm, and handed Scarata a datapad and a rather heavy, flimsy wrapped package about the size of a small blaster case. Not much information, but Val is still working on the problem, and General Jusik sends his compliments. Thanks, Captain. Scarata glanced at it, and then unwrapped the parcel. But it wasn't a weapon. It was a box of candied Vrelu nuts. Jusik was a very thoughtful officer indeed. Scarata broke the seal and got up to place it on the table, within the reach of both Scrods. Fill your boats, lads. Vi had his usually silly grin on his face, the faintest hint that he might be planning to do something at Ordo's expense. Oh, nice new skirt, said Vi. You went to all that trouble just for us. What happened to the old Kama? Did it shrink in the wash? He got up and stood a pace or two in front of Ordo, still grinning and clearly expecting some backslapping or some other show of delight at reunion after several months. Excuse me, Sergeant, Ordo said calmly, and smacked Vi down on the floor with a none-too-playful body press. Vi yelped. Being hit by someone in armor when you weren't wearing your own hurt. Boss's expression was a study in shock. The Delta boys jerked upright in their seats and stared as if they were debating whether to step in and break it up. Ordo looked like cold death. Even Scarata had times when he wasn't quite sure which way Ordo would jump. Your big mouth is going to get you into a lot of trouble one day, Tharkis. My eyes locked on Ordo's neck, tense. Looked ready to fight back. So you better hope I'm there when that happens. Then Ordo burst out laughing and got to his feet in one move. He hauled Vi upright by his arm, slapping his back enthusiastically. The old firm back together again, eh? Good stuff. Boss glanced at Scarata, who smiled enigmatically, or so he hoped. Gnolls were either your best friend or your worst imaginable enemy. Vi luckily had a devoted friend. He still looked shaken by the nature of the reunion, though. Okay, you can thin out now, and we'll resume tomorrow morning, with our little generals for the full intel briefing at 0800, Scarata said. Now that we all understand each other. Oda took a handful of candied nuts and stepped outside with Scarata. The two men stood in the corridor, giving the squads a chance to chat now that Delta had been suitably unnerved. And maybe they thought he couldn't hear them, but Scarata wasn't as hard of hearing as they imagined. Years of exposure to deafening fire or not. And it wasn't what he expected to hear. Fierfek. I remember thinking he was just bent over breathless. But he was actually crying and throwing up, and it wasn't the Nerf guts. He never liked knocking us around. And he always apologized and made sure we were okay afterward. Top man. That was Nina talking. Jetney Bure. The best father. Well, that was a joke. His own kids had formally disowned him and declared him Da Bure instead. No longer father. It was a very rare and shameful thing for a Mando father to be formally shunned by his sons. But he couldn't have left Commando, or even told them where he was, and that he hadn't completely abandoned them. Not even Ordo knew about the declaration of Da Bure. You put your clones first, before your own flesh and blood, didn't you? Are you alright? And I don't regret doing that. Not a second of it. I'm fine, Ordica. Thou must be losing his touch. There's nothing useful from our friends. There might be nothing to get out of them, of course, but it's not a quick process. Interrogating experienced suspects without killing them. What about getting one of our jetties to help out? They're good at persuasion. Possibly too squeamish. Jusek is always anxious to please, though. He's much more use in the field. Brave lad. Handy with tech and a good pilot. But the girl's got an edge to her. Let's see if she'll put pragmatisms above principle. Do you dislike them, Calbia? It's not a matter of liking them or not. It's whether they're reliable. Look, they will race you and every last clone. And me, if he thinks it'll win the war and save civilians. But the Jusek hero worships you. And I don't know which of those two extremes is the more dangerous. This is your opportunity to help them become the soldiers you made of us then. Ouch. Why do I always get the feeling that you were more of a man at 4 years old than I would ever be? Odo gave him a playful shove. He was clearly in a good mood today. Let me ask General Turmukan to interrogate the prisoners. If she finds that morally unacceptable, then her view of you won't be tainted by it. Scarata had to bite his lip. Ordo often shamed him with unexpected compassion and diplomacy. Yeah, I reckon she'll find it easier to do the heroic infantry stuff than get dirty along with us. But leave her to me. Very well, Ordo said. Have you decided where we need to base the operation? I've got a few people who owe me favors. Where we where would you hide soldiers? Hide or conceal hide? Not taking much notice of activity hide. Somewhere with a bar. Somewhere you'd get a lot of off-duty traffic. You don't drink. Never seen a clone drink much at all. Scarata was suddenly ambushed again by Ordo's agile brain. For a man who knew little of life beyond warfare, his ability to learn and extrapolate from the smallest scrap of information was breathtaking. And you never get off duty. You said, Calbia, that you might disguise the presence of some hulking big boys in armor by having a lot more of them around. You were going to see Ma Yugian about a smokescreen. Sorry, remember Ma Yugian? The man who can talk out of all three corners of his mouth at the same time. The man you grabbed by the... Cal remembered all right. Yeah, if I'd known then that I'd need him, I'd have been a little more careful. I think I can propose an idea he might find attractive. Would that involve leaving bruises? I wasn't planning to injure him. Just point out that if troopers were actually allowed leave in considerable numbers, it would reassure the public too. Eventually, we become invisible. Ordo pondered that telltale little frown creasing his brow. Sometimes his staggering intellect and perfect recall didn't help him process the real world one bit. At least not where Scarata was concerned. Let me try Calbira. I promise I'll be more diplomatic. It was a joke, Ordica. I think you'd probably stand as much chance of charming him as I would right now. Have I ever let you down? It wasn't a rhetorical question. Scarata was mortified. It was all too easy to swagger out of the meeting full of aggressive confidence and forget that Ordo, muscular, lethal, the ultimate soldier, was vulnerable to the approval of one person alone, him. It was as if Ordo became that literal trusting child again. The one who had decided that the only person in the galaxy who would ever look out for him and his brothers was a down-on-his-luck mercenary who didn't much like Kaminoans. I didn't mean it literally, Scarata. Scarata reached up and ruffled his hair, just like he'd done when Ordo was a scared little kid, terrified by the lightning on Commando. Except he hadn't had to reach quite so far in those days. You're my pride and joy. You couldn't be smarter or better or braver, any of you. Ordo looked blank for a moment, and then managed a smile. But it was the placatory gesture of a child under threat. I know I have gaps in my knowledge. Oh, son, I'm going to change that. for all of you. I know, Calbia. His trust was transparent and absolute. You're our protector, and we'll always serve you. Scarata winced. Faith was devastating if you weren't up to being a god. But I don't regret it. No, not a second of it. Logistics Center, Grand Army of the Republic, Coruscant, Command HQ 370 days after Geonosis. You're not on the authorized personnel list for this center, said the security droid at the doors. Odo reached past it and tapped a memorized code into the door panel. The sentry was a solid block with 4 arms, a head shorter than he was. Well done. You're right to challenge me, sir. Odo reached into his belt and took out a stylus probe. The droid was fast, but not fast enough to avoid the probe. Odo slipped silently into the command port in his chest. There was a check of memory, drives and motors stalling for a moment, and then the droid seemed placated. You appear to be on the authorized personnel list, it said. You have access to all the areas, including those restricted to staff officers, without one on-site security tracking. Excellent, Odo said. Walking through the doors into the polished white marble lobby. I'm a very private person. And it was easy to be private when you were in armor. Nobody took much notice of a clone inside the Gar complex. Not even one wearing an ARC Trooper captain's livery. It was simply a matter of looking as if you had every right to be going about your business. And the Nullscrod's proper business was anything Cal Scarata deemed it to be. Right now, that meant identifying a method of inserting covert surveillance into logistics. The most likely place for a mole who could relay very precise information on transport and contractor movements to the Separatists. Odo took out his datapad and consulted it frequently, as if he were here for a routine visit. Without the possibility of eye contact, none of the civilian staff seemed even to register his presence. The right armor here was usually clone troopers, who were physically unfit for frontline service, engineer corps or ARC troopers, carrying out occasional inspections for their generals. After striding into a few offices, startling the droids and getting an occasional glance from civilian technicians, Odo walked into the operations room at the heart of the logistics ring and struck gold. It was a large circular room with walls that were covered in live holocharts of troop and material movements. It danced with brilliant light and color. A HUD on a grand scale. At the room's heart was a large multi-station desk, staffed by 2 droids, 4 humans, 6 Solistans, 3 Nimbanzees, and 1 clone trooper minus his helmet. Excellent, Odo said aloud. The clone trooper jumped to his feet and saluted. Even though it was technically a poor example of protocol, to do so without his helmet in place. Odo returned the salute anyway. "Problem with your helmet, trooper." The man lowered his voice. "It makes the civilians edgy, sir. They prefer to see my eyes." Odo bristled. He would never defer to civilians' whims. "I'm carrying out a routine survey for General Camas." He didn't give the man his designation. Alpha Ox rarely bothered to identify themselves to the lower ranks. He glanced at the civilians. One of the Nimbanese and a human female looked up at him. The pale reptilian Nimbanel was interesting as a detail, but the human female was enough to make him stop, stare, and note her as suspicious. She smiled at him. He still had his helmet on, but she smiled at him, and she was shockingly beautiful. Both those facts were worrying in an administrative department. She looked down at the data console, lost in her work again, and flicked long, pale, blonde hair over one shoulder. "Trooper," Odo said. He beckoned the man to him. "I'd like you to brief me on the operations of this unit." They walked outside the main doors, and Odo removed his helmet to look a brother in the eye, and gave him due respect. His gloves tally scanner told him the man was CT 5108-8843, an EOD operative, a bomb disposal expert, the kind of man who disarmed booby traps and UXBs so that other troopers could advance, the kind of man who could do work that even droids could not. The explosive connection wasn't lost on Ordo for one moment. "What's your name?" The trooper hesitated. "Kor, sir," he said quietly. "And what brings you here?" Kor paused and then pulled off his gauntlets. He had no hands. They had been replaced by two simple prosthetics, so basic that they didn't have a synth flesh coating. Just the bare steel mechanisms. Odo didn't even have to ask how he had acquired them. Somehow, losing both hands was shocking in a way that losing one was not. Hands defined humanity. "There's a parts shortage, sir. What's with there being so many men injured and needing prosthetics?" Kor said apologetically. "And these aren't good enough for me to do my job in the front line. As soon as the parts come through, I'll be back, though." Odo knew what Kalbira would have said then, and he was moved to do the same. But this wasn't the time or the place. He held back. "Do they treat you properly here?" Kor shrugged. "Fine, actually, sir. The civilians tend not to speak to me that much, except for Supervisor Renan. She's very kind to me indeed." Odo could see it coming. Renan would be the blonde woman, yes? Kor nodded. His expression noticeably softened. "Bessane Renan. She doesn't approve of the fighting, sir. But she doesn't let it affect her work. And she's looking after me very well." Poor naive trooper. How well. We have lunch together, and she is taking me to visit the Galactic Museum. Fascinating. Otto had learned the wisdom of mistrust at a very early age. Glamorous woman EOD expert logistic hub. He could work it out. Not starting his observation here would have been stupid. But there was little to be gained from crashing in yet. How many shifts? 3 per daily roster, sir. I might need to ask you to do something for me, Core. Certainly, sir. But when I do, it will be classified, and you're to discuss it with nobody, not even your supervisor. It will be part of a routine fraud audit. That's all. And that's why I need your silence. Did it matter if he told him his name? Only the Special Forces Inner Circle knew who he was anyway. My name is Ordo. Mention that to nobody. Yes, sir. Understood. Ordo wanted to tell him that he understood his loneliness among strangers, and his need to be back with his brothers at the front, doing real work. But he could tell him nothing. He ushered him back into the operations room, noted the lovely and apparently genuine smile that Supervisor Wenin gave him, and paused on his way out to break into the automated comlink relay and place a monitoring device. Poor Core. Ordo patted the sentry droid on the head and strode to his parked speeder. Eight. Yes, I know how the Kaminoans did it. They use our genes against us, the ones that make us bond with our brothers, make us loyal, make us respect and obey our fathers. That's what they manipulated to make us more likely to obey orders. They had to remove what made Django a selfish loner, because that makes a bad infantry soldier. And you can tell from the Alpha Ox that the Kaminoans weren't wrong. But there's one thing I don't know yet, and that's how they controlled the aging process. That's the key. They robbed us of a full lifespan. But we will not be defeated by time. Navad. ARC Trooper Lieutenant N7 Mirel and encrypted transmissions to N11 Ordo. Republic Administration, Senate Head of Public Affairs Office, Floor 391, Support Services Center, 370 days after Geonosis. Marujian's office was very near the top floor of the administration building and had a view that some senators would have killed for. Odo wondered how Ryujian did his killing, metaphorically anyway, because he had the air of a man who would terminate anyone in his way without a second thought. It was a long way down. Odo tucked his helmet under his arm and admired the steady stream of speeders in the sky lanes below. It's been a while, Ryujian said. perfectly pleasant. I never imagined I might be in a position to be any help to you. The subtle threat wasn't lost on Scarata. At least if his blink rate was anything to go by. I appreciate your assistance during the siege. You remember my captain, don't you? Captain Ordo? Sir, can Mr. Eugean offer you anything to drink? A glass of juice would be very welcome, thank you. Scarata was indeed inferior in rank, but it always made Ordo uncomfortable to hear Calbier call him Sir. We were wondering if you might be able to advise us. Eugean betrayed no discomfort whatsoever at talking to a clone. Happy to help, Captain. He tapped something on his desk. Refreshments, please, Jail. Juice and some cakes. He smiled. But what could I advise you upon? You seem to have your public image pretty well honed. Smart, efficient, and noble. You can't buy an image like that. We feel that our troops should have a little more comfort in life, and we're aware of how much weight your advice carries with key members of the Defense Department, said Ordo. Ah, Eugean's eyes narrowed, ever so slightly. Quite right, too. What do you want out of this, then? Leave. More of it? Any of it. They don't get leave. Any downtime is spent in barracks or in training. Oh. You didn't know that? No, frankly. I didn't. I never asked. Eugean actually seemed surprised. Or at least he was feigning it very well. But that's a command decisions. They won't bend easily to public servants like me. Ordo took a glass of brilliant emerald juice handed to him by Eugean's young female assistant, who simply stared, eyes scanning him. Calbier was right. Civilians never saw clone soldiers face to face. It almost threw him off track. In strategic terms, the temporary withdrawal of a few thousand troops from the front line makes very little difference, he said. But I'm sure you know that warfare isn't all about big bangs. There's another front, and that's here. Ordo tapped his temple. Visible troops around Coruscant. Good for public confidence, right? Now, with a constant threat of terror attacks, and good for our men. Eugean toyed with a cake studded with chunks of glistening red and purple fruit. I admit that the Senate would like some positive results on the terror attacks. It's making the administrations look helpless. Much as I respect our colleagues in the CSF, they're not making much progress, are they? Scarata cut in. But if they did, it would be very timely, wouldn't it? And I'm sure that you'd be told about it right away. This was the interesting thing about Scarata. He could speak around corners. He was an articulate, self-educated man. And that always came as a surprise to outsiders. Drusix fell for the rough diamond act all too often, but Val wasn't the only Mando with a razor-sharp mind and a fine line in rhetoric. Scarata could switch from Mando hard man to politicians without a visible change of gear. Order found every conversations and education. I always appreciate information, Eugene said, especially when I know it'll serve some real purpose. So, Ordo said, and drained his glass. The assistant popped in again, as if she'd been sticking out the office, and refilled it. We have 2 battalions of the 41st Elite back in barracks, and an assault ship's crew waiting on a refit. If someone could come up with the idea of an extended leave with the men, allowed and encouraged to go off base, I think everyone would benefit, and maybe some credits to spend, because they don't get paid. A nice feel-good story for the media. Rujian's expression flickered briefly from professional neutrality to surprise, and then back again. Never even thought of that, you know. So is this going to involve your men, the RCs? Rujian pronounced it RCs, like a soldier would. It was internal jargon, and not for outsiders. Scarata blinked for a second, and then shifted down a gear into Mando mercenary again, albeit it's one in a better mood than usual. They're not RCs. RC sounds like a droid to the public. My boys are men, so please refer to them as Republic Commandos, not just Commandos, and the other forces as troopers, or by their rank. He slurped his calf enthusiastically. Words like RCs, cannon fodder, grunts, corporals, squaddies, pongoos, meat cans, white jobs, or even shiny boys create the wrong impression. Terminology is everything, I find. Rujian was actually making notes on a sheet of flimsy. He took no offense at all, not visibly anyway. Very useful, he said. Leave this to me. And I'm sure Captain Obram has your common code at the very top of his list. Should there be any good news for you? Scarata smiled and looked, as if he meant it. Ordo nursed his glass, leaving a little juice at the bottom to fend off more instant attention from Rugian's assistant. An inevitable fact of life is that some of us are doomed to do the dirty, thankless work in the shadows, while someone else gets the headlines, Rugian said. Headlines can be overrated, said Scarata. The captain has another meeting to attend, but thank you for your time. It was all very civilized. Another coded conversation, where the unspeakable had somehow been spoken. And it was all a far cry from the sweaty, anxious hours at the Galactic City spaceport a few months before, when Rugian had been no more than a severe irritant, and Scarata had taken a rather physical dislike to him. Now the man seemed to have a clear and almost uncanny grasp of exactly what he was being asked to do. And although he must have had questions, he never asked them. It almost made him a soldier. The descent in the turbolift felt like a rapid insert via gunship as they plunged down 100 levels. Scarata began laughing quietly and pinched the bridge of his nose, eyes shut. I wish I'd realized that Ryugian would respond to a simple request. Then I'd never have, well, you know. If you hadn't captured his attention in such an assertive way at the siege, perhaps he wouldn't have been so accommodating today. That man might even make a useful member of an intelligence bureau one day. He just needed me to show some understanding of his own positions. Sometimes I think people want more from me than they actually do. So where does this leave us, Ortica? Odo counted off on the fingers of his glove. Smokescreen in progress. Team on standby. Split into watches. Observation points and potential operational houses. Collated and identified. Armory and logistics in place. Confirmed link between devices and prisoners. But all dressed up and nowhere to go. Still a large gap in the intel. What did the droid crack out of the download from Aten? Scarlet asked. A lot of data that needs combing by hand when we have other intel to put alongside it. It's just lists of businesses like any transport company would keep. Nothing leaps out. Sometimes I wish we had to deal with weak ways. They'd label things top secret and give us a clue. Why is this proving so hard? Fairfek, Sun, Kumrik, and Jiaying can track a flitnet across the galaxy, and we can't find a gang in our own backyard. I'm sorry, Calbia. I should be able to crack this. I'm letting him down. This is a double line of surveillance, I'm afraid. The Terra network itself, and whoever is providing their intelligence. And that could be inside our own organizations, or in the CSF, and the latter is going to be harder to identify. I'm not blaming you. It's just an expression. And my brothers do know the identities of the flitnets they're looking for, of course. Only one option's left, then. Explore every line and dot. And hope for a lucky break while we are doing it to speed things up. Unless Val gets lucky. Time to break out the emergency Jedi, I think, son. L800 tomorrow, said Ordo. Still got time to do some more preparations then. Let's go and see a Hutt who owes me one. Well, a lot more than one, actually. And let's pick up Sev and Squatch so they can see how it's done. There were things Karata could do that not even a commando or an Orc could. And one of those was to work his contacts. Odo committed it all to memory. Tonight would be highly educational. Kribu's Hut's Entertainment District, Coruscant. Delta Reese troop in attendance. Garish green light framed the pulsing orange sign above the entrance. Kribu opened late. It was already dark, and Scarata thought it was high time the bar welcomed new customers. I'm only a simple trained killer, Sev said, but something tells me never to eat in a restaurant with a bad pun over the door. You haven't tried the food yet, Scarata said. That'll leave no room for doubt. Or dessert, Scott said. And did I mention I feel naked? About a dozen times since we left HQ. Get used to it. You can't wear armor all the time. Odo drew one blaster. Squash raised his eyebrows. I'm being low-key, Odo said. Or I'd draw both. I really didn't notice you in that shiny white rig at all, sir. Listen up, lads. Scarza slid one hand into his pocket to feel for a reassuring meter of durasteel chain, and held his right arm straight at his side. He hadn't seen the hut in a long time, years before Commando, and it was bound to be a nasty shock for the old slug. Kribu might be surprised to see me, especially as he still owes me a fee. So no heroics. I can handle him. Scarada gestured for the two commandos to stand back in the open lobby. Look casual and read the menu. And don't throw up. The sprawling maze of rooms passed for restaurant, bar, and hotel. But only if the Coruscant food hygiene inspectors were looking the other way. It was perfect in every way if you wanted not to be bothered. There was a certain anonymity in the rough end of the entertainment district. It was just the kind of place where an awful lot of cloned soldiers could pass in and out without drawing comment, at least after the novelty wore off. Scarata leaned on the intercom. Kribu the Hutt was at home. He just knew it. It was the skinny Duros suddenly standing in the doorway with a blaster that gave the game away. We're closed, the Duros said. And I'm Cal Scarata. The Duros' gray fist closed on on the blaster, and I said we're closed. Odo shrunk around the door and leveled his blaster in the Duros' flat face. No, I do believe you're open. And we'd like to see tonight's special, please. The Duros paused long enough to gape, which was probably what saved his life. If he'd lifted the blaster, Odo would have killed him. Odo grabbed his wrist anyway, and twisted it almost as a side effect of wrestling the blaster from his grip. And there was an unmistakable snick of cracking bone. The Duros squealed. I think that means come right in, Scarata said, and made sure he had his blaster in his waistband. Kribu might have shelled out some credits for competent help after all. He wandered into the deserted restaurant and noted that the carpet didn't quite stick to his boots as much as it used to. He wandered behind the bar, as much to check that nobody was looking there to give him a very unhappy hour, as to see if the glasses were clean. Odo's blaster whirled faintly as he raised it. When Scarata looked up, Seb and Scorch were covering one door each. Good lads. They'd all do fine out in the big bad world. Cal, Kribu inched out in the kitchen. A raft of exotic spice and burned fat, escaping as the hut eased himself into the fire. So you come for your bounty at last. I thought you would never come. And you have staff and a nice jacket now. Must be doing better business, yes, colleague Scarata said. I'll take hard currency, but if you haven't got that, we can negotiate. Kribu was unattractive, even by hut standards. His tongue flicked across his slit of a mouth, and he edged to the bar to slither onto his dice and pour a couple of drinks. Your boys want ale, Kribu indicated a jar of pickled gorg on the bar. Snacks? No thanks, Seven Squatch were a chorus. Eyes fixed on the jar of very dead amphibians. Couldn't manage another thing. Okay, you and I talk then, Cal. I take it you haven't got ready currency. Not that much. Give me time and... Let me make it easy for both of us. Scarta pulled up a stool and sat down to bring himself level with the hut's eyes. I'm a tourist. Can my boys take a look at your rooms? If we like what we see, we'll stay for a while. Scarata indicated that the turbolift. Seb and Scorch drew their blasters and disappeared for a wheeze. Ordo locked the main doors again and paced slowly around the bar, probably committing the layout and every detail to memory. A right little hollow recorder. Ordo. Another superb advantage of perfect recall. So, you have a project in hand, Cal. I might have. Does it involve dead people? Not this time. I just need a place where my colleagues and I can relax and not be bothered for a while. Kribu's yellow slit pupilled eyes followed Ordo around the bar. Scarata could never see yellow eyes now without thinking of Kaminoans. Your colleagues are soldiers. Yes, they like to make the most of their leave. They don't get much, so they do little jobs for you, Kribu said. Yes, and none of these jobs need inconvenience you. You won't get any visits from CSF because my boys behave themselves. You just want peace and quiet for them to do those little jobs for you. You have no idea how much, Slug Breath. Yes. In exchange, you ate off that small sum I owe you. I might. It was 500,000 credits, plus interest. He didn't need it now. There was a time when he would have risked his life, and that of anyone who got in the way to pick up a fee like that. He'd been a successful debt enforcer for a brief time, but it wasn't proper soldiering. I might also bring some trade your way, because there could be a lot of troopers in town who want to visit somewhere relaxing. You offer me more than I owe you. There is a catch. The catch, Scarlet said, feeling the negotiation slipping away from him, is that you'll guarantee no trouble here, and my definition of trouble is quite exacting. No unwanted attention, and no nonsense from your usual low-life clientele. No taking advantage of my soldier boys. As much food as they want, fresh and properly cooked, please, and clean rooms. They don't drink much, but they do tend to like a lot of calf and sweet beverages. Kribu blinked slowly, still apparently distracted by Ordo, who was taking an interest in the kitchen. Mind if I do a food hygiene inspection? Ordo said, and disappeared into the kitchens, without waiting for a reply. Kribu's gaze slid towards the kitchen and then back to Scarata. You ask for a lot for your shiny boys. Scarata closed his hand around the end of the chain in his pocket. The slug needed to learn who had the upper hand in these negotiations. That's because they deserve a lot. You owe me a lot, and if you mess me about you'll have a lot more trouble than you could possibly imagine. Scarata built up to giving Kribus a serious smacking, was suddenly interrupted by a civil shriek from the kitchen. A young Trilek female came rushing out the doors. He realized Ordo must have startled her. It might have been the twin blasters, and only respectable females allowed in the bar, Scarata added. But the Trilect looked terrified, in a way that said she was used to being that way, and he didn't like that at all. He knew Kribu only too well. She doesn't look like your usual kitchen staff. The girl huddled against the far wall, staring at Ordo, who merely walked out and holstered his blaster, with an exaggerated gesture. He didn't do reassuring very well at the best of times, let alone with women. It was time to teach him more social graces when carrying firearms. The hut gurgled a laugh. Females. You know how they are. Enough. Scarata pulled his Durasteel chain out in one movement, and whipped it around Kribu's neck, twisting it in his fist as he wrenched the quivering bulk toward him. The metal cut into the creature's soft fat, leaving a white margin where the blood could no longer circulate. Listen, Shag, Scarata said, feeling his anger tightening his throat muscles. There was no worse insult for Hut than slave. I like Trilek females, honest one, the sort that don't thieve or worse. So no mistreating the staff, or I might discover what a trade union activist I can be. Just look after any of my boys who pass this way, Aniki. You step out of line, and there'll be a new batch of fresh blubber products at the market, first thing in the morning. He twisted the chain a little tighter. Shiraga no yaka, fat boy, no trouble. Kribu's third eyelid flicked across his reptilian eye, like a windscreen wiper. Your pretty shiny boys die anyway, sooner or later. That was it. Scarata jerked the hut's head down, and brought his knee up in Kribu's face as hard as he could with a wet thwack. He didn't need this thing to remind him of that, and mock their sacrifice. Kribu spluttered ammonia-scented saliva, moaning. "Are we going to get good service at your establishment?" Scarata said, ignoring the pain in his kneecap. "Or would you prefer to pay me 500,000 creds plus 9 years interest right now?" "Tagawaloda. That's more like it." He loosened his chokehold a little. "A bit of customer focus is good for business." Kribu balked visibly. "I lose profit." "You'll lose a lot more than that if you mess around with me. I've always wanted to see if huts really can regenerate body parts." Scarata tightened the chain again. "Kenu drukata shalmandar aid." "Don't mess with Mandalorians." It wasn't bad advice. Kribu was no linguist, but Scarata knew tone could convey a great deal even to an animal, and maybe even to a hut. He hoped that the lack of circulation in Kribu's neck was translating for him. "Tagra, Sergeant," Kribu said, and let out a long wet gasp as Scarata released the chain. 7 Scorch emerged from the turbolift again and gave Scarata the thumbs up. "Ideal for a relaxing break, Sarge," Squat said. "Lovely clear views. Platform to park a speeder or 6, and lots of room to stretch our legs. A whole floor of rooms at the top, in fact. Good defensive visibility, easy access and escape, and the right layout for moving around and storing kit and ordnance. Excellent. If it's good enough for my colleagues, it'll be good enough for me," Scarata said. "You want to take a look just to make sure, Ordo?" Ordo shook his head, still seeming wary of the Trilake female. "I'll go with the majority." "So long stay rates?" Scarata asked. "As discussed," Kribu said. Scarata slid off the stool and wiped the chain clean of Kribu's slime before coiling it and putting it in his pocket again. He was concerned about the Trilake, though. Civilians were hardly his prime concern on this operation, but it didn't cost anything to be courteous. He walked over to her. She was still cowering. He squatted down almost instinctively. He saw 6 scared little boys waiting to be reconditioned. "I'm Cal, ma'am," he said. "What's your name?" She didn't meet his eyes. She had that way of looking off slightly to one side that he thought he'd seen too many times before. "Lasima. Well, Lasima, if your boss isn't treating you well, you let me know, and I'll have a word with him." He smiled as best he could. "And none of my boys will give you any problems either, okay?" "Okay," she said shakily. Her legs were moving slightly, but Scarata couldn't understand the unspoken language they conveyed. She might just have been twitching out of fear. "Okay." Scarata gave her as reassuring a smile as he could manage, and moved to the doors. "We'll be back tomorrow to move some stuff in. Have the top floor ready for us, will you? Nice and clean. And fresh flowers, Scott said. They ambled back to the speeder and set off for Akka Barracks. Settling into an automated skylane and merging into the stream of glittering taillights. Coruscant was lovely at night, just as Phi said. Scarata had never thought about it much before. He nudged Sev. Good operational hour house, then? Tailor-made. It'll take us a day to move the kit in this discrete amounts. But we can access via the landing platforms when it's dark again. Does our host get nervous about strong ordnance? Ordo said. He's a hut, said Scarata. He's stored a lot worse. And what he doesn't know won't keep him awake at night. Squirt seemed impressed. You really were a bit of a bad boy in your past, weren't you, Sarge? What do you mean, past? Sev said. And they laughed. They were perfect special forces troops. Very bad boys in their own right. But they had never dealt with the criminal underworld. And crime was an inevitable partner of terrorism. It was one reason why Scarata didn't feel one scrap of misgiving about going bandit himself. Fair feck. He'd impressed them. The Delta boys were emerging from their closed, tight-knit exclusivity and settling into the larger team. That was one problem solved. There was still the operation itself, of course, and keeping an eye on Atin, Bao, and Sev, and introducing Etain to an element of war that wasn't remotely noble, and making sure that everyone came out of it alive. Scarata reached over the back of the seat and gave Sev and Scorch a playful swat, then nudged Ordo beside him. I promised you all a night out, he said. When we get this cleaned up, Zay's going to get a really big mess bill from the officers' club. Maybe we shouldn't wait until then, Scott said. You never know what's around the corner. No, you didn't. You never did.